on Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1. Streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
You're listening to the Jan Price Show, and today my guest is cinematographer Anastas Michos, and we're going to be talking about The Kissing Booth 2, which is opening on Netflix. It's very soon. Hi, welcome to the show, Anastas.
Hi, thank you so much for having me aboard.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. This is a fun movie. This is a really, it's not a movie that I would necessarily watch myself, but because I knew I was doing the interview, I did watch the first one, The Kissing Booth, and I just thought it was adorable and uplifting, and I was looking forward to seeing the second one. And I just was leading an interview with Joey King, the star of the film, and also a producer. Actually, has a producing credit on Kissing Booth 2. And she said the critics didn't really care for the film, but the public did. So talk a little bit how you worked on both films. What was it like for you? And you filmed in Cape Town, South Africa. Is that for both movies, or is that just? Yes. Okay, so why was Cape Town, South Africa chosen to represent Santa Monica, California? Let's start with that.
As you know, as many people know, but some don't, that the movie business goes where it actually follows the tax dollar and the credit. So we tend to follow the most bang for buck. The first movie was a very small film. It was tiny, not expected to do well at all. Just a little movie, coming of age story. And one's dollar goes much farther in South Africa than it does in Santa Monica, just by the nature of the exchange rate. And interesting enough, Cape Town is as far below the equator as LA is above the equator. So the climate is very much the same. The sensibilities are the same in terms of palm trees and ocean and oceanfront homes and whatnot. So that's how we ended up there.
Interesting, because you don't hear about too many movies being filmed that are supposed to represent America in South Africa. So that's an interesting, and they're beautiful homes, by the way.
They are. Most people, many Los Angeles, I really have to try and convince that, in fact, it was not in, because they actually say, oh, I know that house. And I go, I don't think you do. No, it's in Malibu. No, I don't think it is. So it is that similar, of course, except that they drive on the other side of the street.
Yes, they do. I love Africa. I love South Africa. I've not been to Cape Town yet, but I have been to Kenya and other places in Africa, and I absolutely have an affinity for Africa. So what was it like? So you've worked on all kinds of wonderful movies and all different types of genres, from left period pieces to romantic comedies and thrillers and musicals. So what was different about filming this movie?
Well, the way it came about was I was in South Africa working on another film for a different studio, and it was a very dark movie indeed. It was a supernatural thriller, so all shot at night, lots of rain, gloom and doom, and I was there for months. And I'm the type of cinematographer, and I think that most of us in the business are, we assume the mantle of the tone of the film that we're doing because we're working with it day in and day out. Even if it's, we know it's make-believe, but if you're around crypts all day long or people shooting at each other all day long, it lends a certain tonality to your dreams. So while I was there, I met serendipitously a colleague, Michelle Weisser, the producer, who we had dinner together, and she said, well, I'm doing this little romantic comedy. And instantly I said, oh, when do you guys wrap? When do you start? And she goes, no, not this date. I go, oh, I'll be wrapped by then. Throw my name in the hat. And I had a lovely dinner with the director, Vince Marcello. We got along so well. It was a Thanksgiving night dinner in Cape Town, and he invited me aboard. And it was just a pleasant release from the kind of film I'd been doing. So I literally jumped on board and met Joey, and I loved the script. And when I met Joey and started to see her character as Elle, I thought, wow, this is really going to be a very sweet film. And much to our surprise, it became Netflix's most rewatched movie.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't it amazing? Because the audience, I was trying to figure out really who is your target audience in a way, because it does deal, it does deal with, sexual subjects. And I thought, okay, obviously you're assuming it's going to be high school students. And maybe since it's been so long since I've been out of high school, I didn't.
Well, I think it runs the gamut between, young teens and into their 20s, I think, because the story is it's so grounded about a young person's first love. And it's grounded in that sense of reality. And Vince is a marvelous director who got the tone of the film, which I believe is sometimes the most hardest thing to get. If the script is right and the cinematography and the acting is right, the tone and the pacing, he just managed to nail it. And I had friends who were, Italian and Mexican and Argentinian young girls and their mothers go, wow, what a great movie it was, So worldwide, it struck a note which was fun to see.
Yeah, and I do think that, when I was watching it, obviously being an adult woman, I just thought it was adorable, and it was just, right now I'm looking for anything uplifting. All I'm doing is watching romantic comedies right now. Just to get away from it. Like the news is, I'm discovering old movies that I didn't even know were out at one point at a time. And so this was very refreshing. And I thought, well, this is a movie that it's multi-generational. I'm not sure about young kids, but certainly, parents and their teenagers would watch this film, and maybe the grandparents too.
I think so. I think it's you could see three generations sitting on watching this film, and each one of them bringing to the table their own either memories or expectations for the future of it, because as you said, it deals with some quote unquote more adult themes like sexuality and whatnot, but those are real questions that high school kids do and have, and the real issues that they deal with and how they deal with it. So I was pleased to work, and Vincent and I have to say, it was one of the most delightful collaborations I've ever had in my career. We're to the point where we laugh at each other's jokes before the punchlines delivered. So.
I love it. That's a good relationship.
Yes, a great very relationship. Much so.
And that makes that working environment so much more enjoyable. In reading an interview I said with Joey King, she said she thought the sequel was better than the first, and I also thought it was quite good. I thought they were on the same on par. I thought the first one was cute, and having watched them back to back, and the second one was also adorable. But this time it also touched on the theme of homosexuality. So how did the writers and the rest of the cast feel about touching on that topic, because it is relevant today in this world, and certainly for high school students to be able to see a film that represents them in that way. There's others, but in this light comedy, it's not something that you would see touched upon. So how did that come about?
Well, you'd have to direct that question directly to the writer, Vince, as to how it was put into the film. I do know, though, that among the crew and among the actors, when we did those scenes, there was such a feeling of support for the character. And it's one of those things that I love the way it was written because because these are a group of kids that went to school together, and we probably assume they've been going to school all the way through their high school years. And Joey has the friendships that the young man comes out to her first during that beach scene. And it is such a matter-of-fact, loving smile that she gives when she can support her friend in discovering his own sexuality. That I think it just leaps off the screen. It's just a wonderful scene. Mm-hmm. And it goes on without giving away the film. And it goes all the way on to the penultimate scene. So I do like that. Again, like I said, Vincent was very had his finger on the pulse of what that time is, and I think the film managed to show it.
Mm-hmm. And it does it in a really lovely way. So yeah. So when you, as I said, you work in a lot of different genres. How do you approach a movie like this? I mean, this is a light, fun, comedy, versus when you did Texas Chain Massacre.
Yeah, that was not so light.
I mean, that's a big range. Big range.
And then Mona Lisa Smile. Let's throw that one in there too with Julia.
Yes.
So I think that the job of a cinematographer, the way I approach it, is that although I have my own aesthetic, I'm not necessarily steeped in a particular style. I think that the narrative is what describes the photography, and I've always been a student of putting the camera and what is the story being told. And it's when I talk to my operators and my assistants, my gaffer, I always say, so what's the story? What are we saying? Why is the camera here? And once you start to answer those questions as to why the camera's here, then you can start to answer the question of why does the light look the way it does? Why am I creating a space and a mood for this character to operate within? So at times, a dark thriller or a horror film such as First Purge can be a little bit more experimental, because you really play with the edges of the spectrum. How dark is dark? How scary do you want it to go? How can we just barely see an actor and reveal a pop scare, for example? The other side of that in a romantic comedy is, particularly of The Kissing Booth, is how do we create a world that is the idealized world of high school, because we're very clear that not everybody's going to the school. It's an elite school that they're going to, and possibly what is as an older adult, when you think about your high school experience, we tend to idealize our memories, our good ones, and so that was probably the approach that Vince and I spoke about, and took it in that direction.
Very interesting. So, did you approach this one any differently than you did the first one?
I think when you're doing a sequel or a franchise, as I've done a couple, one has to, the very first one, depending on its how it's been received, sets a tone. And one can't stray too far away from the tone of the film, because it's the same story. The Kissing Booth 1 and 2 are continuations of a story that happens just literally months later. Unlike, let's say, a Marvel comic or a Batman series or something like that, where you say, okay, this is the prequel and it happened 20 years earlier or 15 years later, and one can play with genre and lighting and tonality. In this story, they're pretty well continuous. So we didn't do much to change from one to the other. I just wanted to make sure that the romantic parts were romantic and idealized, and that the actors look good, that they were, the good-looking people, and I just wanted to make sure that we kept them that way.
And they are good-looking people. Yeah. Especially Noah. Sorry?
Yes, especially Noah, yes.
Yes, Jacob Elordi. Is that how you say his last name?
Yes.
Yeah, he's adorable. And now we have a new leading man also in this one, too, that was also quite handsome. So that keeps your attention, even as an older adult woman.
No, absolutely. And,
sexy young men to look at. Yeah.
Yes, and there is that. I mean, one of the things that it's been a criticism about American filmmaking in terms of casting movie stars versus European filmmakers, and it is a style that America has. We do cast good-looking, idealized people. Europeans tend to do so less. But that's what this film was. It was an idealized version of LA. every place that they went to in Los Angeles was beautiful and great and trendy and fun. And so, we keep that among our actors and in terms of the lighting as well.
Very fun. Very. You've worked with some amazing actresses. You have worked with, let's go back to Julia Roberts on Mona Lisa's Smile. Isn't that where she met her husband, Danny Moder?
No, they actually met on, 2 years before that. Danny was the second assistant on the Julia movie that she did with Brad Western.
The Mexican.
Yes,
the Mexican. It. Okay.
Yes,
So, but then Danny worked on this, right? He worked on.
Yeah, I brought Danny on as a B camera operator. Oh wait, he worked on Mona Lisa Smile. He did not work on Kitchen Booth. Yes.
And Mona Lisa Smile. Yeah, I was just So what was it like working with Julia Roberts? Because she's amazing.
I've been doing this for quite a while as a camera operator and a DP. So the first time I worked with Julia was on a movie called Kings of Carolina that was directed by Lasse Hallström, shot by Sven Nykvist, and I was the A camera operator. Then I worked with her again on something called Stepmom, which was a Susan Sarandon directed by Chris. Why can't I remember Chris's name? Chris from Home Alone, Chris.
Yes. Oh, well, it'll come to us. I don't know Kings of Carolina, but I do.
That was Bobby Duvall, Dennis Quaid.
Oh, wow.
Julia. Kara Sedgwick, who was great in that.
Yeah, I love her.
Family drama in the South. And Lasse Hallström, of course, from, all the wonderful films he made. Then I worked with Julia again on a thing called Mary Riley, which was a Stephen Frears film with John Malkovich, a remake of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So Julia and I go way back. And she's fantastic. She's such a pro, such a charming, kind, loving human being, as down to earth as anybody would want their family member to be. And I cannot say enough kind things about her.
Yeah, she seems to be that way. That's what you get, that essence from certain people, but then you hear sometimes stories about them that they really aren't that way, and I'm like, really? I'm disappointed. But it's nice to hear that she is that way. That's why we would adored her all these years.
I think so. She's got something coming up on Netflix now. I heard she's doing a thing with Denzel.
Oh, that's right. I did read that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That looks very interesting. Very interesting. They're reteaming after what, Pelican Brief? Is that the one they did together?
Yeah, that's 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, more, I think. Yeah. So that's kind of exciting. I mean, Netflix is attracting bigger stars all the time and they're teaming up. I mean, more and more actors are teaming up for projects that are going to be on Netflix. And God, thank God for Netflix and all the other streaming services during this pandemic.
Absolutely. I mean, at one point, I think, I do believe that watching something streaming on your television and the cinematic experience are two separate things.
Yes.
And we don't have the latter.
Right.
And I don't mean them to, and they're equals as well. The storytelling that's been going on in the streaming world has just been getting better and better and better and better. As more people watch, there's been more writers to write and directors to direct. So I have great hopes of what might be out there coming up.
It's obviously a very interesting time that we're living in. And I've said over and over and over again on the show throughout the years that, movies are meant to be seen in the movie theaters, quite honestly. And that's, there's movies that are made for television. And obviously The Kissing Booth was made for Netflix, for a streaming service. But, the big movie, Tenet, we're all waiting for Tenet, to come out. And it keeps getting pushed back and pushed back. What do you think? It's a little on the topic, but off the topic of cinematography, but about filming going forward. I mean, are you afraid to go back on a movie set?
No. I have a movie coming up with Morgan Freeman in a few weeks, so I'm not
love him
to go back, at all. Him. I mean, I think that with if we believe in science, which I do,
me too.
Yes, I do. I believe that the Earth is round. and that scientists are vetted and they are experts in their field. And having stated that, I believe that following the protocols that scientists put out for us minimize risk to the extent that work is acceptable. And I liken it to, thank goodness there's a thing called the FAA, which minimizes the risk of getting on airplanes, because people put a bunch of rules in place saying if you're going to cart people around, you make sure that the pilot's trained, the mechanics are trained, the parts are vetted, et cetera, et cetera. So therefore, the risk of going 36,000 feet in the air at 600 miles an hour is minimal. So since I fly, I also am listening to the scientists and going, okay, so we're minimizing the risks for to go back to work. And I think work will happen again, as like I said, I'm doing it. One of the things I do want to say, though, to liken it to cinematography, though, is that you shoot differently for a television screen versus a big screen.
Yeah, tell me about that. Tell us about that. What's the difference?
The language is different. And when I say the language is different, it has to do with tonality. And it has to do with viewer perspective. If you could imagine, going to a concert and watching a concert, or just listening to a concert on a headset versus being in a concert hall, in music terms, you will recognize that the instruments are placed in a certain way that in a concert hall you have a kind of experience. It's visual as well as oral. When you put your headsets on, it's only oral. When you're looking at a big screen as opposed to a smaller screen, the language changes in the sense of a close-up on a big screen has far more impact when somebody's face is 30 feet wide than it does in your home living room set when they're 60 inches wide. The same thing with the wide shot, and the same thing with pacing. So in terms of how it's cut, how bright things are, how dark things are, what's the ambient light around? Are people going to get up and turn off their living room lights while they watch your piece? I do remember that there was a lot of complaints at one point about Game of Thrones and one of the episodes being too dark. Like a year ago or so. And the question, and I was curious about that because it's a rare occasion you go into a movie theater where you're not used to the dark, but that same scene in your living room, might be too dark to see.
Right. And right. It also, yes, it does depend on your light in your living room when you're watching it and all of that. And
the same thing. And the same thing with that, orchestral piece. If you have it blaring on your speakers and the mixer is going in the kitchen, it's gonna change the sensibility of that piece rather than in a concert hall. So we do approach it differently, or I do for sure.
Anastas, it's been lovely having you on the show. It's a joy and enlightening, and I hope that Kissing Booth 2 is as successful as Kissing Booth 1, and maybe it will become a series, as you say, a franchise with more of them. I can see them going to college and continuing this story. It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
If you've missed any of the Jan Price shows, you can go to my website, thejanpriceshow.com, where you can listen whenever and wherever. Also, you can listen on the iHeart Podcast Network, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play. And like the Jan Price Show on Facebook and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the Jan Price Show. Thank you for listening.
On Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1, streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.